We are back on Inside Politics today. Our guest is Nashville Congressman Jim Cooper. He's retiring from office at the beginning of January. Congressman, you never received less than 64% of the vote when you ran for re-election. I think you did that 5 times in the 4th District. You represented parts of the eastern part of the state that hadn't had a Democrat represent them since the Civil War days. But in 1994, you decided to run for the U.S. Senate. That turned out to be a very bad year for the Democrats to run. It was a true Republican wave. Did you think you could beat Fred Thompson?
Well, we really didn't know who the Republican candidate was going to be, and Fred got in the race. He said that Howard Baker had told him it was his turn, and that isn't the best reason to run. But Fred Thompson's celebrity, of course, soon outclassed me, and he rented a pickup truck, and he became famous for that. And in retrospect, it was a mistake, but it's hard to see these national political waves forming. But Bill Clinton back then was way less popular than he was at any other time in his presidency. So I had tried to work with Clinton on having come up with a big new health care plan, but that was not appreciated as I thought it might be by Tennessee voters, so Fred won handily.
You mentioned Governor Ned McWhorter. You mentioned him being one of your mentors, but you were not happy with him because you wanted him to appoint you to the Senate seat because it became open earlier because Al Gore left, but he put some in on an interim basis. Do you think you'd have won had the governor made you the senator?
Well, Ned thought that you couldn't be handed a Senate seat, you had to earn it. But he gave his friend, Harlan Matthews, the Senate seat to hold it just for 2 years. And he was known to be a placeholder. But I thought for Tennessee voters, like, why waste a seat? Why not build seniority? And I was young and aggressive. And I think I was endorsed by almost every newspaper in the state. But it turned out that newspaper endorsements were not as valuable as I thought they might be, especially in comparison with movie celebrity.
When you left Congress in 1995, you moved to Nashville and became an investment manager and also an adjunct professor at the Owen School of Management over at Vanderbilt. At that time, did you ever think you'd get back into politics and elected office?
I really wasn't looking to do that. I wanted to be a success in private business and raise a family and spend more time with the family. And I was actually skiing in Colorado when Nashville lost its Congressman Bob Clement. A number of my friends started calling me saying, hey, we don't want a rookie, we want somebody with some experience. I was in my 40s and thought about it for a few hours and then decided to start making the phone calls. And a few months later, I was the Democratic nominee in the Nashville district.
Now, Congressman Bob Clement, who you mentioned, decided to run for the Senate in 2002. That was a pretty crowded primary. I mean, there were the sheriff, Gerald Ray was running, state lawmaker John Arreola, and I believe others. You won with just 47% of the primary. That's the lowest vote total you've ever gotten in any election you've run, at least the ones that you won.
But it was enough. It was enough.
What was the difference for you to win that race when you look back on it?
Well, I think a number of Nashvillians were suspicious of me because I was raised in Shelbyville. I'd represented a rural district. People didn't know a whole lot about me, and there was great local competition because Gail Ray, John Arreola were both fine people and had held local office. Gail was the first female sheriff, I think, in Davidson County history. John Arreola had a big office in the courthouse. So they were well known. So I was just lucky. I think I still ended up getting 15 or 20 points more than anybody else in the race, but still it was a closer race than I've ever had. In
your 20 years in representing Nashville, you were elected 10 different times. You won almost every time with well over 60% of the vote, sometimes close to 70%. In 2010, though, you got just 56% against the Republican candidate, David Hall. What happened in that race? What made you get on the precipice of almost getting beat? Although 56% is usually considered landslide.
Yeah, 56% is a wonderful margin. I'm so grateful again to Davidson County voters for having supported me so much. But remember, we had the little thing called the 2010 flood, which put most everybody in a terrible mood because that was a truly devastating event for our community. The hardship that created was amazing, and of course, once you have a flood, you can't do enough at the federal level to make sure that people were able to repair their homes and get back to a normal life. A number of homes were simply unrepairable because they were too close to the river. So people did not anticipate that either the Cumberland or the creeks around town would be so terribly destructive. So that was a truly bad time in our city's history. There were billions of dollars worth of losses. And it was just generally a time that people were enjoying being angry.
You mentioned the Clinton administration, and you also mentioned health care. When you went back to Washington in '93, you also had your own rival health care plan, rival to one of the most powerful women in Washington, Hillary Clinton, who was the first lady at the time. Did you realize what kind of hornet's nest you were stirring up by doing that?
Well, I really didn't know Hillary Clinton, but I was a big admirer of Bill Clinton's, and I'd already had this bill filed before Bill Clinton was ever elected president, and it had tons of Democrats on it and tons of Republicans. So I thought I'd give them a good start. I did not reintroduce my own bill. I gave it to Hillary Clinton, hoping that she would adopt all or part of it. But she had a healthcare expert, Ira Magaziner, who just made it go far left instead of starting in the middle, where I like to begin. And it ended up that by asking too much of Congress, she ended up getting nothing. And that was a real shame. It was a real lost opportunity for America, because we could have had universal coverage for America almost 20 years before Obamacare. And because my approach was bipartisan, we wouldn't have had all the Supreme Court litigation that we ended up having with other bills.
Now, your relationship with Hillary Clinton was not the first time you got into sort of a tough situation with one of the most powerful women in Washington. 5 times you voted against Nancy Pelosi, who was your party's nominee to be Speaker of the House. Why did you do that, and did she ever retaliate?
Well, remember that Nancy and I are still, and I've always been, really good friends. And actually, my opposition to her helped her, because she needed to look super liberal to be the congressman from California. And opposition by me helped her look more liberal. And she also helped me, because by my opposing her, I looked more conservative back home here in Tennessee, which helped me. So that was a win-win situation for both of us.
You voted for her in 2021. What had changed, you or her, or the situation?
Well, she gradually became literally one of the most historic and important speakers in House history. I had faltered her originally, not because of any personal grudge, but because she adopted largely the Newt Gingrich management style for Congress, which was centralized top-down leadership, telling all the committees what to do. And I remember the old Congress, where committees got to decide what they wanted to do. And sometimes we told the Speaker what to do. So I kind of cherished the good old days. But her management technique has taken over ever since Gingrich, and it's unlikely to ever change.
Republicans are retaking the House next month, but with a much smaller majority than they anticipated. The Republican nominee to be Speaker is now Representative Kevin McCarthy. There seems to be quite a division about that within the Republican House caucus, particularly among the more conservative members. In your mind, does McCarthy have the votes to be elected? If not, what can he do to get them?
The best I can tell, Kevin does not have the votes he needs right now. There are too many opponents within his own party. This is not something that Democrats can affect. But Kevin, remember, was not very popular in 2015. He was up for Speaker again, and he was defeated by Paul Ryan, who became Speaker. So Kevin is, in the eyes of many people, an opportunist. You remember he told the truth immediately after January 6 riots. He said what a terrible thing had happened, but a week later he changed his mind and suddenly didn't think anything bad had happened. So it's that sort of vacillation, I think, that worries people about him.
Nashville Congressman Jim Cooper is our guest. He's leaving Washington, but we're talking one last time with him about his reflections on his career and his reflections on the political scene right now. Back to continue our conversation after this break.